Okay, so welcome to the industry analysis for the operational case study of May and August 2020. So here we're going to be looking at the main trends from the real world industry. Of course, in the pre-seen document itself, you will have a small bit of industry analysis. You get a small bit of industry analysis in section 4, but it does primarily pertain to Eastland and the context there. But of course, it will have some overlap and similarities with the real world industry. So what we're doing here is we're broadening your horizon. We're looking at the global context and giving you some key insights and facts and figures from that world industry, just so you have a better sense of the total business context in which ChargeIT is operating. Before I actually get into the details of the industry analysis, I just want to address one common question which is raised about the industry analysis, which is basically, why are we doing an industry analysis at all when you are already given industry information in the pre-seen document? Students often ask, isn't that sufficient? Because of course, if you were expected to know any extra information, it would have been included in the pre-seen document itself. Well, first of all, let me just clarify that you are not expected to be an industry expert by any stretch of the imagination. You're not expected to know all of the ins and outs of the global industry, all of the details, information, all of the major companies and so on and so forth. Don't worry about that. You're not expected to be an expert on lawnmowers or on vacuum cleaners or on the technology side of things, okay? But there are good reasons, I believe, to do a broader industry analysis than what you're just presented with in the pre-seen document. And I think it has to do with understanding that wider business environment and industrial context. It has two really important potential benefits on exam day. Firstly, it helps you to anticipate some of the potential issues that might arise in the unseen scenario and therefore avoid any nasty surprises or confusion. So it's going to familiarize you with some of the trends in the broader industry, some of the key concepts and ideas, so that you're not really caught off guard on exam day. Because of course, the examiners are going to want to try to present you with realistic scenarios, unseen scenarios on exam day. So they're likely to use some features from the real world industry to frame their questions and frame their scenarios for you. So it's a good idea just to have a better sense of the general nature of the industry in the real world. And secondly, then, of course, related to that, is it makes it easier for you to illustrate and apply your abstract theoretical knowledge. This is the purpose of the case study exam. It's to apply, to show that you can realistically apply what you've learned in your objective studies and to actually frame it in real world terms when you're presented with a particular business context and particular business environment. So you're able to use, for example, concrete examples from the real world, specific concepts and materials and resources and so on that are relevant to the real world industry. So for that reason, I think it's important and useful to do a broader industry analysis, and that is the purpose of what we're doing here today. So just another note, by the way, don't worry if you're scribbling down notes at the moment and trying to get down everything that's in this industry analysis PowerPoint. Don't worry about that side of things, because we will be putting this PowerPoint up on your account after this. So we'll be putting the video up, but we'll also be putting the PowerPoint presentation up as a downloadable PDF. So you don't necessarily need to be scribbling down everything that you're seeing in terms of text on the PowerPoint that you're seeing today. That will be made available to you later on. But of course, do feel free to take down your own notes. And as I said, you can ask questions at the end if you have any. Okay, so here's an overview of what we're going to be covering in today's industry analysis. We're going to start with the vacuum cleaner side, and specifically the cordless vacuum cleaners market overview, looking at some of the key trends, projections for the coming years, and also some of the key product points as well. In section 2, we're moving then to a focus on the garden equipment side, looking at the cordless garden equipment market in particular. Again, same idea, we're looking at some key trends in recent years, projections for coming years, and also some interesting product points as well. And then finally, we're going to finish up in section 3 with some real world cases, a couple of real world companies that I think could offer some inspiration for a company like ChargeIT. They're two very different companies in many respects, but I think both of them are very relevant to ChargeIT's situation. And I'll explain why a little bit later on. And of course, you are free to do a deeper dive on these companies if you wish to do so in your own time. And we include source links in this PowerPoint presentation as well, which you'll be able to look into yourself later on when we put this PowerPoint presentation on your account. Okay, so let's get started on the cordless vacuum cleaners market overview. So, well, let's start with the basics. What exactly are vacuum cleaners? Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with what a vacuum cleaner is in general, but of course, just to be safe, it's worth starting with a basic definition. So, a vacuum cleaner is a device that uses an air pump to create a partial vacuum to suck up dust and dirt, usually from floors and from other surfaces such as upholstery and drapery. So it covers all of those things. People sometimes mistakenly think that vacuum cleaners are just for floors, but you can of course use them on other surfaces as well, and that's often where the handheld comes in very useful. The dirt is collected by either a dust bag or a cyclone. Now increasingly vacuum cleaners are moving towards the cyclone type container that was made famous by Dyson, the Dyson company, and we're moving away increasingly from dust bag technology mainly for environmental and waste reasons. So vacuum cleaners, which are used in homes as well as in industry, an important point to remember there, industry, not just the domestic segment, exist in a variety of sizes and models. So you can see here on the right, we have a nice little just illustration of the main models of vacuum cleaners that are available. You have the stick or upright, and this is sometimes referred to as well as a hybrid vacuum cleaner. We're going to come back to that a little bit later on because that is an important technology. You have the handheld, and that's useful for smaller surfaces and things like cars as well. You have the robotic vacuum cleaner, which is very important from the pre-scene point of view. The canister, which is the more traditional kind of vacuum cleaner that you are probably more familiar with. And then you have the wet and dry as well, and that tends to be used primarily for industrial purposes. But those on the left there, the stick upright, the handheld, the robot, and indeed the canister, primarily the biggest market there is the domestic market still. Okay, so let's look at some figures here, starting with the household vacuum cleaner market in general. You can see on the right, global household vacuum cleaners market revenue by region to 2018. So global household vacuum cleaners market is expected to reach a value of $18 billion here, US dollars, by 2026. The market is estimated to expand at a compound annual growth rate of 4.7% during the forecast period from 2018 to 2026. So that's a fairly healthy compound annual growth rate. Now, I will say, of course, bear in mind we're dealing here with a situation that is unprecedented at the moment in the real world with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would take a lot of these projections with a grain of salt, of course, in light of that. No one could see that coming, or at least very few people saw that coming. And so a lot of these figures in terms of projections of absolute numbers, you can take with a pinch of salt, and you can pare them back by some orders of magnitude. But the point, I think the main point that you should bear in mind is that the relative numbers are likely to remain the same. That is to say, where you're going to see more growth. For example, in certain regions, you're likely to see more growth than in other regions. And I think that's the most important point to bear in mind. Even if the compound annual growth rate isn't as high, it's still likely to be the case that in certain regions, you're going to see more growth than in others. So the household vacuum cleaners market in Asia Pacific is projected to expand at a rapid pace during the forecast period. That is the important takeaway here, is that Asia Pacific is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing region, and that's going to become very important from a strategic point of view, especially for a lot of the companies that are primarily based in North America and Europe when it comes to expansion plans. So just bear that in mind. Looking then at the cordless vacuum market size by product here, and this is looking from 2012 all the way up to 2022. As you can see here on the right, the robotic segment has accounted for the most growth over the last decade or so, and it will continue to do so in the coming years. So robotic, in terms of growth, is very, very important for the cordless vacuum market. Household robots market by region, then we're looking specifically at household robots, and this includes vacuum cleaners, of course. We're talking about other robotic products as well, but this is including the robotic vacuum cleaners. North America is expected to continue to show strong growth, but as I mentioned, it's the APAC region, so the Asia Pacific region, that will be the biggest mover, and indeed it's projected to overtake North America by market value by 2024. So as I said, the absolute numbers might not be exactly in line with this given the recent events in the real world, but the relative growth is the important point here, and it's APAC is the big mover, and it's likely to overtake North America in the household robots market, and that's going to include vacuums, robotic vacuum cleaners as well. So, cordless vacuum cleaners market trends. The emerging focus here of consumers in adopting advanced appliances for convenient and effective cleaning is a notable factor stimulating the demand for vacuum cleaners. So the growing number of household consumers who are at risk due to asthma, this is an important point, is a notable trend, catalysing the uptake of vacuum cleaners, especially robotic, which allow for highly regular cleaning. So the convenience, but also the frequency with which these kinds of devices can be used or made use of is very important from the perspective of hygiene-conscious consumers, and particularly for those who might have, for example, asthma sufferers in their families, or people with various respiratory or allergy-based illnesses or deficiencies. So that's an important point to bear in mind there. That's driving some of this increased demand, relatively speaking, for those robotic devices. Now, this is, I think, an important point, and it's one that's interestingly not really spoken of in the pre-seen document, and I think maybe this is a little trap on the part of CIMA. The fact that they've left this out, it might be an important oversight in the pre-seen from the perspective of the company that we're dealing with, and this is what's called HEPA or HEPA filtration, which is really important in the vacuum market or vacuum industry. The presence of HEPA filtration, which is basically high efficiency particulate absorbing, that's what the HEPA acronym stands for, technology in vacuum cleaners is gaining traction amongst hygiene conscious consumers. So consumers are becoming more aware of this filtration type, and this is a level or a standard of filtration which is becoming important in the consumer's mind. So that's something to bear in mind. It's not something that is just a consideration from the manufacturer's point of view, but consumers are beginning to latch on to the importance of this kind of filtration, high efficiency particulate absorbing. Common standards require that a HEPA air filter must remove from the air that passes through at least 99.95%, and that's in the European context, or in the North American context, 99.97% of particles whose diameter is equal to 0.3 microns or micrometers. Just to give you a sense of how small that is hundreds of times smaller than the diameter of a hair. So we're talking about tiny, tiny, tiny dust particles. So this is quite advanced filtration technology, and this is increasingly becoming the norm in the industry. In a typical household vacuum, you would need to replace this kind of filtration system every 1 to 2 years. Now, bear in mind, these kinds of filtration systems are not in all vacuum cleaning devices. They tend to be in the higher end or higher quality vacuum devices, but they're increasingly becoming demanded by hygiene conscious consumers. And as I said, it is notable by its absence from the pre-seen document. There isn't much, if any, talk about the importance of filters in the vacuum cleaner context. And so I think that's something that might come up. You might see something like this arise on exam day. Maybe this is an overlooked point by ChargeIT. They haven't been putting enough emphasis on filtration, the importance of filtration from the consumer's perspective, for example. But if they are, and another important point then related to that is, of course, the supply. So are they actually getting these filtration systems and these filters in from a third-party supplier? If they are, that's going to be a very important supplier relationship which needs to be managed carefully. Or are they actually producing these in-house, in which case the quality standards need to be very, very high indeed, because these are deceptively complex components of vacuum cleaners, and they need to be very carefully managed, very carefully produced and manufactured, and they have to meet those very demanding standards as well. And there is some variation, as I said, in those standards in the international context, but in and around 99.9% of those particles have to be removed. So these need to be really up to scratch in order to have this HEPA filtration accreditation. So some key facts and numbers then. Based on end-use market, the residential or domestic segment dominated the market during 2017 with a market share of over 88.13%, with the rise in disposable income and rising health awareness, as well as general improved standards of living. So this is the segment that is most important. Unsurprisingly, in vacuum cleaners is the domestic segment. You do have some, of course, commercial and industrial demand as well, but the domestic continues to dominate. In terms of percentage share contribution by product category, the hybrid cordless vacuum cleaner segment is expected to account for a whopping 80% by 2023, emerging as the leading segment by value. Now, what is the hybrid cordless vacuum cleaner? The hybrid cordless vacuum cleaner, you may be familiar with the Dyson, and this is one of the examples on the right here. This is basically a vacuum cleaner that can be changed into different kinds of vacuum cleaners. It can be transformed into, for example, a handheld device or a standard upright vacuum cleaner if you take off certain parts and add in certain kinds of attachments. It's a very versatile product, and for that reason, unsurprisingly, is becoming increasingly popular for domestic consumers. And so that is the big mover here, and you can see the projection there, 80% of the market by 2023. That is a very significant share, and of course that's something that needs to be borne in mind by anyone producing and manufacturing in this segment. Currently, the cordless vacuum cleaner consumption market is mainly concentrated in Europe and North America. China is still the major production base. Okay, so a lot of outsourced production to places like China for cordless vacuum cleaning products, with many well-known foreign brands having set up joint ventures in China. Now, currently, as you know in the pre-scene with ChargeIT, the manufacturing is done in-house. It was brought in-house in 2016, but of course the common standard in this industry is still to outsource the production manufacture to places like China. So if there is a lot of cost pressure coming in the future, and again the COVID-19 case is obviously something to be taken into account there, then maybe we'll see a company like ChargeIT reconsider that decision from 2016 and think maybe we need to consider outsourcing our manufacturing again, or at least outsourcing a significant proportion of it to a low labour cost country, relatively speaking. So that's just something to bear in mind there. So there is, of course, now a higher demand for smart solutions. The hybrid or cordless and stick vacuums held around 25% of household vacuum cleaners market share in 2019. And as we saw, that's expected to skyrocket over the coming years, primarily driven by the popularity of those Dyson models. We're going to see a lot of copycats coming into the market over the next few years. The demand is really shooting up for these household vacuum cleaners, increasing significantly owing to their fast and flexible operations. That versatility that I mentioned is really important. These cleaners offer enhanced portability and convenience due to their ability to be converted into handheld cleaners. So the surging demand for smart and automated electric appliances across the globe is leading toward the adoption of robotic cleaning solutions. The robot household vacuum cleaners are equipped with advanced features such as room mapping, robot self-charging, and laser vision to offer convenience to users. So a lot of really interesting futuristic kinds of technologies are now being incorporated into vacuum cleaners, and the robotic one, of course, the most relevant in that respect. Additionally, companies are developing products with advanced technologies, including navigation, even security cameras now being incorporated in some cases, UV sterilization, so we're talking about a hygiene feature there as well, and intercom systems. Now, bear in mind here, I think really important from your e-studies is the Internet of Things. It's really important. Technology, and of course technology and data are very, very important in the new syllabus in the enterprise pillars, and I think the Internet of Things here is especially relevant to some of these products in this pre-scene. The future then of robotic technologies, so many possibilities. The global robotic vacuum cleaners market growth is premised on the rising demand for artificial intelligence. Again, that comes up in your e-studies, and the Internet of Things enabled home appliances. According to research by Cisco, by 2021, next year, automated home appliances will represent nearly 46% of machine-to-machine connections within the household. So 46% of household devices interconnectivity is going to be accounted for by these kinds of home appliances. Many high-end vacuum cleaners can be connected via Wi-Fi and also have voice recognition or activation capacities. So you can tell your device, you can tell your robotic vacuum cleaner to start cleaning the floor. That's a neat little feature. As a result, they can be controlled remotely from any part of the house and require minimal human intervention, a very attractive feature indeed.